The mahogany-paneled courtroom buzzed with anticipation as billionaire tech mogul Alexander Hayes sat rigidly at the defendant's table, his usually confident demeanor cracked like a broken facade. Across the aisle, the prosecution team shuffled through thick folders with the satisfied expressions of predators who'd cornered their prey. The case against Hayes Industries for alleged financial fraud had dominated headlines for months, and today was supposed to be the day his high-powered legal team would dismantle the government's accusations piece by piece. Instead, Alexander found himself completely alone. His lead attorney, Marcus Sterling, had suffered a massive heart attack just 3 hours before the trial was set to begin. The 60-year-old legal legend was now fighting for his life in intensive care, leaving behind a defense strategy that no other lawyer could pick up mid-trial. Sterling's associates had scattered like startled birds, claiming they needed weeks to prepare, while the judge refused to grant another continuance after 6 months of delays. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Patricia Clearwater said sternly, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade, "do you have legal representation today, or will you be defending yourself?" Alexander's throat felt dry as sandpaper. He built a technology empire worth $12 billion, revolutionized 3 industries, and employed over 50,000 people worldwide. Yet here he sat, more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life, facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison and the complete destruction of everything he'd spent 25 years building. The charges stemmed from allegations that Hayes Industries had manipulated quarterly earnings reports to inflate stock prices, a crime Alexander knew he hadn't committed. The real culprit was his former CFO, Elena Rodriguez, who had embezzled millions through sophisticated accounting tricks before disappearing to a non-extradition country. But without Marcus Sterling's brilliant legal mind to present the evidence of Elena's guilt, Alexander looked like nothing more than a desperate CEO trying to blame a subordinate for his own crimes. "Your Honor," Alexander said, rising slowly, his voice barely steady, "I find myself without counsel due to my attorney's medical emergency. I would like to request—" "Mr. Hayes," the judge interrupted, "we've been through this. No more delays. Either you have representation or you don't. The trial proceeds today." From the gallery, Alexander heard the excited whispers of journalists and the satisfied murmurs of federal prosecutors who couldn't believe their luck. His company's stock had already plummeted 40% since the charges were filed, and his conviction seemed all but guaranteed without proper legal defense. As Alexander sat back down, feeling the weight of impending doom, he noticed a woman in the back corner of the courtroom quietly observing the proceedings. Rosa Martinez wore the simple navy uniform of the courthouse cleaning staff, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, her weathered hands folded in her lap. She'd been cleaning this particular courtroom for 8 years, arriving before dawn and leaving after sunset, invisible to most of the lawyers and judges who passed through. But Rosa wasn't just any cleaning lady. Hidden beneath her humble exterior was a secret that even her supervisors didn't know. She possessed one of the sharpest legal minds that had ever walked through these courthouse doors. 25 years earlier, Rosa had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, the first person in her immigrant family to attend college, let alone one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. She'd been recruited by top firms, courted by federal agencies, and destined for a brilliant legal career that would have made her wealthy and famous. Instead, life had intervened with devastating swiftness. Her husband, Luis, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease just as she passed the bar exam. Their infant daughter, Sophia, had been born with severe medical complications requiring constant care. Rosa had faced an impossible choice: pursue her legal career or care for her family. For her, it hadn't really been a choice at all. She'd taken a job as a courthouse cleaner because it allowed her to work around her family's medical appointments while staying close to the legal world she loved. For over 2 decades, she'd mopped floors and emptied trash cans while secretly studying every case that came through the building. She knew the judge's tendencies, the prosecutor's strategies, the defense attorney's weaknesses. She'd mentally argued hundreds of cases while scrubbing courthouse windows, developing legal theories while polishing wooden benches. Rosa had watched Alexander Hayes' preliminary hearings with the trained eye of someone who understood both the law and human nature. She'd seen the evidence against him, but more importantly, she'd noticed the glaring holes in the prosecution's case that his expensive lawyers had somehow missed. She'd observed Elena Rodriguez during her depositions, catching the subtle tells that indicated deception. The slight shoulder tension when discussing specific financial quarters, the way her eyes shifted when asked about certain transactions. Most critically, Rosa had been cleaning the courthouse late one evening 3 months ago when she'd overheard a conversation that could change everything. Federal prosecutor James Morrison had been on the phone with his superior, discussing a piece of evidence they'd decided to withhold from the defense. A digital trail that clearly showed Elena Rodriguez accessing the company's financial systems from overseas after she'd supposedly fled the country. The prosecution was hiding evidence that could exonerate Alexander Hayes, a violation so egregious it could result in their disbarment and the complete dismissal of all charges. But without a lawyer to demand discovery of this evidence, Alexander would never know it existed. As the prosecution began their opening statement, painting Alexander as a greedy executive who'd stolen from investors and employees alike, Rosa watched the defendant's face carefully. She saw not the arrogance typical of wealthy criminals, but the genuine bewilderment of a man who couldn't understand how his life had spiraled so completely out of control. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Morrison declared with theatrical confidence, "the evidence will show that Alexander Hayes systematically defrauded investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars, manipulating financial reports to line his own pockets while honest, hardworking Americans lost their retirement savings." Rosa knew this narrative was false. She'd studied the financial documents during her late-night cleaning shifts, and the money trail clearly led to Elena Rodriguez, not Alexander Hayes. But without proper legal representation, this innocent man would likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison. When Judge Clearwater asked Alexander if he was ready to present his defense, Rosa watched him stand on unsteady legs, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of legal procedure he'd never had to understand before. His hands shook as he shuffled through papers Marcus Sterling had prepared, documents that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the good they did him now. "Your Honor," Alexander began, his voice cracking, "I know how this looks, but I'm innocent of these charges. My former CFO, Elena Rodriguez, she was the one who—" "Objection," Morrison shouted. "Hearsay and speculation." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "Mr. Hayes, you cannot simply make accusations without proper evidence and procedure." Alexander's face flushed red with frustration and helplessness. He had the evidence but no idea how to present it legally. He had witnesses who could corroborate his story but no understanding of how to call them properly. He was drowning in a system designed to protect the innocent, but only if they could navigate its complex rules. Rosa felt her heart breaking as she watched this decent man's life being destroyed by legal technicalities and prosecutorial misconduct. She'd spent 8 years cleaning these courtrooms in silence, but she couldn't remain silent any longer. Her law degree might be old, her bar certification long expired, but her knowledge of the law remained razor-sharp. Standing slowly from her position in the back corner, Rosa's voice cut through the courtroom with unexpected authority. "Your Honor, I object to the prosecution's failure to disclose exculpatory evidence in violation of Brady v. Maryland." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Clearwater's eyes widened in shock, while Prosecutor Morrison's face went pale as if he'd seen a ghost. Alexander turned in his chair, staring at the cleaning lady who just used legal terminology that most practicing attorneys would struggle with. "Excuse me," Judge Clearwater said slowly, "but who exactly are you?" Rosa walked forward with quiet dignity, her cleaning uniform somehow carrying more authority than the expensive suits surrounding her. "Your Honor, my name is Rosa Martinez. I'm a Harvard-trained attorney, class of 1999, and I've been observing this trial with great concern for the defendant's constitutional rights." "This is highly irregular," Morrison sputtered, clearly rattled. "A member of the custodial staff cannot simply interrupt a federal trial." But Judge Clearwater held up her hand, her curiosity piqued. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had never encountered anything quite like this situation. "Ms. Martinez, are you currently licensed to practice law?" "No, Your Honor," Rosa replied honestly. "My license lapsed years ago due to personal circumstances. However, I believe Mr. Hayes is entitled to adequate representation, and I formally request permission to address the court regarding prosecutorial misconduct that could result in a miscarriage of justice." The judge studied Rosa carefully, noting the precise legal language, the confident bearing, the obvious intelligence behind her weathered exterior. "This is unprecedented, but given Mr. Hayes's lack of representation and the seriousness of these charges, I'll allow you to speak. But first, Mr. Hayes, do you consent to Ms. Martinez addressing the court on your behalf? Alexander stared at Rosa, seeing something in her eyes that gave him the first hope he'd felt in months. He didn't know who this woman was or why she was helping him, but her knowledge of law was immediately obvious, and he had nothing left to lose. Yes, Your Honor, Alexander said firmly. I consent. Rosa moved to the defendant's table with the natural grace of someone who belonged in courtrooms, not cleaning them. She opened Alexander's briefcase and quickly organized the scattered papers with the efficiency of someone who understood legal documents intimately. Your Honor, Rosa began, her voice strong and clear. The prosecution has violated Brady v. Maryland by withholding material evidence favorable to the defendant. Specifically, digital records showing that Elena Rodriguez, the alleged co-conspirator who fled the country, continued accessing Hayes Industries' financial systems for weeks after her supposed departure, during the exact period when the fraudulent transactions occurred. Morrison shot to his feet, his face red with anger and panic. Objection! This is completely improper. A former employee with an expired license cannot make accusations without evidence. On the contrary, Rosa replied smoothly, pulling a thick folder from her cleaning cart that she'd positioned near the defendant's table. I have copies of phone records, obtained through public information requests, showing that Prosecutor Morrison discussed this evidence with his superiors 3 months ago and made a conscious decision to withhold it from the defense. She handed the documents to Judge Clearwater, whose expression grew increasingly grave as she reviewed them. Rosa had spent months meticulously gathering this information during her cleaning shifts, using her courthouse access to piece together the prosecutorial conspiracy. Furthermore, Rosa continued, the prosecution's timeline is fundamentally flawed. They claim Mr. Hayes manipulated financial reports during quarters when he was documented to be in surgery, recovering from a skiing accident, with medical records and hospital surveillance footage providing ironclad alibis. Alexander watched in amazement as Rosa systematically dismantled the prosecution's case with the precision of a master surgeon. She cited legal precedents from memory, referenced specific case law with perfect accuracy, and presented evidence with the skill of someone who'd been practicing law for decades rather than cleaning floors. Your Honor, Rosa said, her voice building with controlled passion, Elena Rodriguez didn't just embezzle money from Hayes Industries. She specifically chose time periods when Mr. Hayes was incapacitated to execute her scheme, knowing he would be unable to detect or prevent her activities. The prosecution knows this, has known it for months, and has deliberately concealed this information to secure a wrongful conviction. Judge Clearwater's face was stern as she addressed the prosecution table. Mr. Morrison, do you have a response to these allegations? Morrison looked like a man whose world was collapsing around him. Your Honor, the investigation is ongoing and… That's not an answer, the judge said sharply. Did you or did you not have evidence showing continued system access by Ms. Rodriguez after her alleged departure? The evidence is complex, Your Honor. It requires interpretation. Mr. Morrison, Rosa interjected with devastating calm, would you like me to read the transcript of your phone conversation on October 15th at 7:23 p.m., in which you specifically told Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, and I quote, "We can't let the defense see the Rodriguez access logs because they completely destroy our timeline." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs as Morrison's face went white. He'd never imagined that anyone could have overheard that conversation, let alone documented it so precisely. Rosa turned to address the jury directly, her voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is not just prosecutorial misconduct, but a deliberate conspiracy to convict an innocent man while allowing the real criminal to escape justice. Elena Rodriguez is currently living in comfort in a non-extradition country, enjoying millions of stolen dollars, while Mr. Hayes faces life in prison for crimes he not only didn't commit, but couldn't have committed, due to his medical condition during the relevant time periods. She pulled out a thick medical file and began reading dates and procedures with clinical precision. March 15th, reconstructive knee surgery lasting 6 hours. March 16th through March 23rd, documented post-surgical complications requiring intensive care. During this exact period, the prosecution alleges Mr. Hayes was personally manipulating financial software from his office, despite being unconscious in a hospital bed with round-the-clock medical supervision. Alexander felt tears building in his eyes as he realized Rosa wasn't just defending him, she was vindicating him completely. This woman he'd never met, who earned minimum wage cleaning the same courthouse where he was being tried, had done what his million-dollar legal team had failed to do. She'd uncovered the truth. "Your Honor," Rosa continued, pulling out another folder, "I have here sworn affidavits from 3 Hayes Industries employees who witnessed Elena Rodriguez intimidating staff members into providing their system passwords, claiming she needed access for emergency audits during Mr. Hayes' medical absence. These witnesses came forward after reading about the trial in newspapers, but the prosecution has refused to interview them." Judge Clearwater's expression had moved beyond anger into the realm of judicial fury. "Mr. Morrison, how do you explain the prosecution's failure to interview witnesses who came forward voluntarily?" Morrison's career was ending in real time, and everyone in the courtroom could see it happening. "Your Honor, the witnesses seemed unreliable." "Unreliable?" Rosa's voice cut through his stammering like a sword. "Patricia Williams, 22 years with the company, exemplary record, no disciplinary actions. Michael Chin, 15 years, promoted 6 times, sterling performance reviews. Rebecca Torres, 12 years, employee of the month 17 times. These are your unreliable witnesses, Mr. Morrison?" She turned back to the jury, her voice rising with righteous indignation. The prosecution chose not to interview these witnesses because their testimony would have immediately exonerated Mr. Hayes and pointed directly to Elena Rodriguez as the sole perpetrator. Instead, they built an entire case on manipulated timelines, hidden evidence, and character assassination. Rosa pulled out her final piece of evidence, a document that would end the trial permanently. "Your Honor, I present bank records obtained through legal information requests showing that Elena Rodriguez made large cash deposits to offshore accounts during each week that the prosecution claims Mr. Hayes was manipulating company finances. These deposits, totaling $4.7 million, occurred while Mr. Hayes was either hospitalized or in documented physical therapy sessions." The courtroom was dead silent as Judge Clearwater reviewed the bank records. When she looked up, her expression was thunderous. "Mr. Morrison," she said slowly, "did the prosecution have access to these bank records?" Morrison's legal career was over, and he knew it. "Yes, Your Honor, but we didn't feel they were relevant to—" "Not relevant?" Judge Clearwater's voice could have frozen fire. "Bank records showing the alleged co-conspirator depositing stolen money while the defendant was physically incapacitated aren't relevant to a financial fraud case?" Rosa stepped forward for her final argument, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just prosecutorial misconduct, but a complete miscarriage of justice. Mr. Hayes isn't just innocent of these charges. He's the victim of the very crime he's accused of committing. Elena Rodriguez stole from his company, his employees, and his investors, then manipulated the timing to make him appear guilty while she escaped with millions." She gestured toward Alexander, who sat stunned by the complete reversal of his fortune. "This man built a company that employs 50,000 people, created technology that has improved millions of lives, and has donated over $100 million to charitable causes. The real criminal is living in luxury while he faces prison for her crimes. This is not justice. This is persecution." Judge Clearwater stood, her decision already made. "Mr. Morrison, I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Hayes immediately due to prosecutorial misconduct and the withholding of exculpatory evidence. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the Attorney General's office for investigation of criminal conduct by the prosecution team." The courtroom exploded into chaos as reporters rushed to file breaking news stories, and Alexander collapsed into his chair, overwhelmed by relief and disbelief. But Rosa wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "I formally request that you issue federal warrants for Elena Rodriguez's arrest and contact Interpol to begin extradition proceedings. The evidence clearly shows her location and activities, and she should not be allowed to escape justice simply because she chose her timing carefully." "Granted," Judge Clearwater said immediately. "Ms. Martinez, your legal work today has been extraordinary. Have you considered returning to practice?" Rosa smiled for the first time since standing up, the weight of 25 years of sacrifice and hidden talent finally acknowledged. "Your Honor, after today, I think I might consider it." As the courtroom cleared, Alexander approached Rosa with tears streaming down his face. "I don't know who you are or why you helped me. But you just saved my life. How can I ever repay you?" Rosa looked at this powerful man whose world she'd just restored and saw not a billionaire or a CEO, but simply a human being who'd been wrongly accused and desperately needed help. "Mr. Hayes, for 25 years I've been cleaning courtrooms and watching justice sometimes fail good people. Today I finally got to make sure it worked the way it's supposed to." "But why?" Alexander asked. "Why risk everything to help a stranger?" Rosa picked up her cleaning supplies, preparing to return to her regular duties, though she suspected those days were numbered. "Because that's what we do for each other, Mr. Hayes. We help when we can, we stand up when we must, and we never let good people face injustice alone." 6 months later, Rosa Martinez walked into the elegant offices of Hayes Industries, not as a cleaning lady, but as the company's new general counsel. Alexander had convinced her to return to law, helped her reinstate her license, and offered her a position that would finally allow her to use her brilliant legal mind professionally. Elena Rodriguez had been extradited and convicted, the stolen millions recovered and returned to investors. Prosecutor Morrison faced federal charges for misconduct, his legal career permanently ended by his ethical violations. But the most remarkable transformation was Rosa herself, who discovered that sometimes the most important cases aren't won in prestigious law firms, but in moments when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things for justice. Alexander had lost his lawyer in court, but found something far more valuable, a reminder that wisdom and courage can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the person with the least power holds the greatest ability to change everything. The millionaire had been saved by a cleaning lady, but in the process, they'd both discovered that true justice doesn't depend on wealth or status. It depends on people willing to stand up for what's right, regardless of the cost to themselves. 1 year after that fateful day in court, Rosa stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School, delivering the keynote address to the graduating class. Her simple cleaning uniform had been replaced by an elegant navy suit, but her quiet dignity remained unchanged. In the front row sat Alexander Hayes, beaming with pride at the woman who had become not just his general counsel, but one of his closest friends and most trusted advisors. "Many of you will go on to prestigious firms, earn substantial salaries, and handle cases that make headlines," Rosa told the graduates. "But I challenge you to remember that the most important legal work often happens in quiet moments. When someone who has no voice needs an advocate, when the system fails, and someone must stand up to make it right." She paused, looking out at the sea of young faces eager to change the world. 25 years ago, I sat where you sit now, believing that success in law meant corner offices and high-profile clients. Life taught me something different. Success in law means being ready to fight for justice, even when you're wearing a janitor's uniform instead of a three-piece suit. After the ceremony, Rosa found Alexander waiting for her outside the auditorium. "You know," he said with a smile, "I never did properly thank you for saving my life." Rosa laughed, adjusting the gold bar pin on her lapel. A gift from the Harvard Law School Alumni Association recognizing her as their Distinguished Graduate of the Year. "Alexander, you've thanked me every day for the past year. Besides, I think we saved each other." "How do you figure that?" he asked as they walked across the campus where Rosa had first learned to love the law. "You gave me the chance to be a lawyer again," she replied. "For 25 years I cleaned courtrooms and dreamed of practicing law. You made those dreams real again. We both found what we were looking for that day. You found justice, and I found my purpose." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "You know what the best part is? Elena Rodriguez is spending 15 years in federal prison, but more importantly, the Prosecutorial Accountability Act we helped draft has prevented dozens of other wrongful convictions. Your moment of courage changed more than just our lives." Rosa smiled as they reached her car, a modest sedan that reflected her unchanged values despite her dramatic change in circumstances. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room has the most important thing to say. I just happened to be listening when justice needed someone to speak up. As she drove away from Harvard, Rosa reflected on the extraordinary journey from courthouse janitor to one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the country. Her husband Luis had passed away 6 months after the trial, but he'd lived long enough to see her return to the profession she loved. Her daughter Sophia, now a pre-med student, often said that watching her mother stand up in that courtroom had taught her that courage comes in many forms. The millionaire had indeed lost his lawyer in court, but in finding an unlikely defender in a cleaning lady, both of their lives had been transformed in ways neither could have imagined. Justice had prevailed not because of expensive legal teams or political connections, but because one woman chose to speak truth to power when it mattered most. Rosa Martinez had spent 8 years invisible in courthouse corridors, but in one shining moment, she had reminded everyone that true justice belongs not to the wealthy or powerful, but to those brave enough to stand up for what's right, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The cleaning lady had become a lawyer again, but more importantly, she had proven that heroism often comes in the most ordinary disguises, waiting for that extraordinary moment when someone must choose between silence and justice. And in that choice, both lives had been saved. The end.